Making a big Hollywood blockbuster ain't cheap, but how expensive is too expensive? Which popular superhero just couldn't save the day, or rather, the opening weekend? Keep watching to find out. Sony has been trying to turn Ghostbusters into a franchise for 3 decades, with little success thanks in part to inflated expectations. The original Ghostbusters made $295 million worldwide in 1984, about $789 million worldwide in today's dollars. 5 years later, Ghostbusters 2 made $215 million worldwide, over $480 million worldwide today. So when Sony finally made a new Ghostbusters after the series spent nearly 30 years in development hell, they apparently figured the new version would land in that $500 to $800 million range. That may explain why they spent a bloated $144 million on 2016's Ghostbusters Answer the Call. The big problem is that it wasn't a sequel featuring characters we knew and loved, but a reboot with a whole new cast. That typically doesn't work out, and Answer the Call was no exception. The film finished with $229 million worldwide. Not bad for a comedy in modern Hollywood, but not nearly enough to warrant a sequel. Instead, Sony apparently learned their financial lessons and made 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife for only half the budget of Answer the Call, allowing it to turn a profit.
You are a genius, Patty.
I'm a Ghostbuster.
Battleship is considered one of the biggest box office bombs of the past decade, and not even Rihanna's legion of fans would argue with that. But it's not for the reason you might think. Battleship wasn't a bomb because it didn't make money. It bombed because it didn't make enough money. Battleship scored $313 million worldwide in 2012. Not bad for an insanely bad sci-fi film based on a board game. That was mostly due to its $248 million international gross. But it had the misfortune of debuting just after Marvel's The Avengers, which went on to become one of the highest-grossing films of all time. The crazy part? Battleship and The Avengers had almost the same budget. The Avengers cost $225 million, about only $5 million more than Battleship's $220 million. Yep, Universal almost spent the same amount on friggin' Battleship as Marvel did on The Avengers. According to The New Yorker, Battleship was greenlit with a $150 million budget, which would have allowed it to turn a profit. But after the production ran into issues, the studio had to throw tens of millions of dollars down the drain to try and fix it. Just because a character is a household name doesn't mean he's a box office draw. Thus, while Superman is probably the most famous superhero of all time, he's no longer the most bankable at the box office. Though he was once. In 1978, Superman the movie made moviegoers believe a man could fly and made a lot of money doing it, earning $300 million worldwide, about $1.2 billion today. Mighty impressive for the Man of Steel. After the original franchise ended with a whimper, with 1987's Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, Warner Bros. Spent almost 2 decades trying to figure out what to do next. The rest was 2006's Superman Returns, which at $232 million cost a lot more than other superhero origin stories at the time. 2002's Spider-Man, for instance, only cost $139 million to make, while 2005's Batman Begins cost $150 million. Superman Returns ended up earning $391 million worldwide. With Spider-Man or Batman Begins budgets, it would have made money, and likely would have spawned a whole new trilogy, just as those 2 films did. Thanks to its inflated budget, though, it has been considered a failure and signaled the final end of the classic Superman franchise. By 2012, the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise had earned about $3.5 billion across 4 films. Pride comes before the fall, so Disney, Johnny Depp, director Gore Verbinski, and producer Jerry Bruckheimer thought their relationship was a license to print gold and could do no wrong. But The Lone Ranger went wrong. Very, very wrong, beginning with the whole idea of reviving an outdated radio western that hadn't been popular for decades. In Disney's defense, they realized the film's budget was getting out of control and even shut down production to contain it. It didn't work. Sources vary, with the final budget estimated to have been between $225 million and $250 million. Wherever it landed, The Lone Ranger would have had to break records to break even. For context, The Lone Ranger cost about $100 million more than the first Pirates of the Caribbean film, despite starring Armie Hammer, who has since been accused of cannibalism, and worse. The film still made $260 million worldwide, so with a smaller budget, it could have been a success. But with those costs, making a Lone Ranger 2 would have been a true train wreck. Thanks to Star Wars, Marvel, Pixar, and Disney+, it may seem like the house that Walt built is indestructible. This conveniently ignores the fact that Disney's original live-action output has mostly been a wasteland of box office bombs, including some of the biggest disappointments of all time. In fact, Disney's desperation for live-action movies is probably why they purchased Marvel and Lucasfilms in the first place. One Disney film that did so-so and would have been a big hit if not for the even bigger budget was Tron Legacy. Tron bombed in 1982, and while it built a cult following, making a legacy sequel 28 years later to a movie nobody saw in theaters was a bit of a head-scratcher. Couple that with the $200 million price tag, and you'd have to wonder whether Mickey lost his marbles. Smartly though, Disney positioned Tron Legacy as the must-see holiday blockbuster of 2010, and it mostly worked as the film earned $399 million worldwide. Had Disney spent just a little bit less, there's no question we would have seen more sequels. As it is though, the legacy of Tron is a failure. Speaking of waiting 3 decades to make an overpriced sequel of a movie that was a flop to begin with, say hello to 2017's Blade Runner 2049. The original Blade Runner made $39 million on a $28 million budget back in 1982, meaning it wasn't a disaster, but was far from a hit. Still, it has been hailed as a masterpiece by critics, so surely that would translate into ticket sales 35 years later, right? Warner Brothers bet $185 million that it would. It didn't. With $258 million worldwide, the sequel far exceeded the original's take, but didn't come close to becoming a hit. We can argue all day whether Deckard was a replicant, but there's no debate on this. Blade Runner should not have been replicated at $185 million. What do you do when your movie's in production, isn't working, and you've already spent a ton of money on it? Option A is finishing the film and hoping for the best. Option B is dropping another several million in the hopes of fixing it. Warner Brothers opted for Option B with Justice League, and the result was a mixed bag at the box office. After spending $275 million on 2017's Justice League, Warner Brothers removed director Zack Snyder, replaced him with problematic Avengers director Joss Whedon, and dumped another $25 million into reshoots, bloating the budget to an incredible $300 million. They still hoped to turn a profit, as Batman vs. Superman had made $872 million worldwide, and Justice League was adding Wonder Woman, Flash, and Aquaman to the film. It should have been a surefire recipe for success. Instead, fans and critics alike hated the film. Bad word of mouth tanked it at the box office, and it limped to a $655 million worldwide gross. Though it made a small profit, it destroyed the franchise, and earned less than half of what Marvel's The Avengers had brought in 5 years earlier. All in all, Justice League was more train wreck than tentpole.
What was it like? Coming back?
Itchy.
Conventional wisdom says the Mummy franchise was going strong until the Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor bombed. As with most things, the conventional wisdom isn't wrong, it's just missing part of the story. Yes, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor was also really bad, even for a franchise that never got much love from critics. However, the Mummy franchise made money with every movie. The problem is that the budget on Tomb of the Dragon Emperor was so much bigger than its predecessors. 1999's The Mummy cost $80 million to make, while 2001's The Mummy Returns cost $98 million. But when Tomb of the Dragon Emperor came out in 2008, it cost a whopping $175 million. Tomb of the Dragon Emperor actually earned $405 million worldwide, almost the same amount as each of the previous films. But with a budget twice as high, it didn't make nearly as much money, killing the franchise deader than Imhotep. Harrison Ford is one of the 10 highest-grossing movie stars of all time, with career earnings $10 billion worldwide, and that's unadjusted for inflation. However, outside of Indiana Jones and The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Star Wars The Force Awakens, Ford hasn't had an above-the-title hit since 2000's What Lies Beneath. That should have changed in 2020 with The Call of the Wild. Keyword should. The Call of the Wild made $62 million domestically and $107 million worldwide. Fairly modest amounts, but for a film about a guy and his dog, it did quite well. One massive problem though, 20th Century Fox spent an incredible $125 million to make it. Blame budgetitis, a term for Hollywood's inexplicable inability to make mid-budget movies. The big issue was their decision to use CGI to create Buck the dog, which turned what could have been a modest hit into a $50 million loser. Some box office observers argue that Robert Downey Jr. isn't a movie star outside his signature Tony Stark role. While there's no denying most of his $15.7 billion worldwide career earnings come from playing the man in the iron suit, he has proven to be a reliable draw in films like Tropic Thunder and the Sherlock Holmes movies. No, his butts in seats bankability isn't on par with Leonardo DiCaprio or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, but no other movie stars have that drawing power either. It seemed like Downey Jr. would add to his bankable resume with 2020's Dolittle, but instead that movie turned out to be a Titanic turkey, and not a talking one either. Yet Dolittle actually made $251 million worldwide, about on par with other live-action kids movies released in the past 15 years, as the subgenre has been dominated for more than a decade by animation. The problem? Somebody at Universal thought it was a good idea to spend $175 million on Dolittle, which is actually more than Iron Man 2 cost to make. Expecting Downey Jr. to pull MCU numbers in a non-Iron Man role was dumb. Still, he might have been one of the only humans popular enough to save Dolittle from utter destruction.
It's not good, as far as I'm concerned. I'm the only human here.
Comedies hit or miss at the box office, as humor doesn't always translate overseas. What's a movie studio to do? You don't spend millions on pricey VFX like you're making a Marvel movie. Instead, you spend most of its money on the movie star and hope he can put butts in the seats. Unless you're Universal, that is. Bruce Almighty, with Jim Carrey's mug plastered on the poster, made $484 million on an $81 million budget in 2003, making it not only Carrey's biggest hit, but one of the highest-grossing comedies ever. But Bruce Almighty worked because of the Jim Carrey as God concept, not the brand. There was no indication audiences would show up to Steve Carell as Noah just because Universal slapped Almighty on it. Well, Universal felt otherwise, and spent $175 million on the film, more than twice Bruce's budget, making it the most expensive comedy ever made to that point. The budget was supposed to be just $140 million, but costs ran up thanks to CGI and live animals. Ultimately, the film made $174 million worldwide, which wasn't bad for a comedy sequel that didn't even star the original actor, but was a disaster of biblical proportions based on the budget. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.